The gravitational pulse from the hyperspace exit always made David's teeth ache, but this time it felt like someone had replaced his molars with tuning forks. He gripped the steering wheel of his ancient pickup truck tighter, watching the familiar mountain road materialize through the quantum displacement haze that still clung to his vision. 6 months of consulting on atmospheric processors across 3 different star systems had left him with a permanent case of dimensional vertigo and an almost religious appreciation for linear time. "Note to self," he muttered, navigating around a pothole that seemed to have grown since his departure. "Next time someone offers you triple pay to calibrate terraforming equipment on Kepler 442b, remind them that you're an environmental engineer, not a masochist with a death wish and a questionable relationship with basic physics." The mountain air hit his lungs like a benediction when he rolled down the windows, carrying the scent of pine and something indefinably green that no atmospheric recycler had ever quite managed to replicate. His grandfather's cabin waited somewhere ahead through the winding turns, unchanged by the universe's casual indifference to human sentiment. At least, he hoped it was unchanged. The automated security system had been sending him cheerfully mundane reports for months. No intruders, no weather damage, no signs of the quantum bears that had been spotted in the lower valleys since the Centauri Mining Consortium had started their deep space excavations. David rounded the final bend, already anticipating the sight of his weathered front porch and the gloriously overgrown garden that would need serious attention after his prolonged absence. Instead, he found himself pressing the brake pedal with enough force to engage the truck's inertial dampeners, a luxury upgrade he'd installed after one too many encounters with the physics-defying wildlife of frontier worlds. Someone was in his garden, not just in it, but moving through it with the kind of purposeful grace that suggested intimate familiarity with every plant, every row, every carefully planned arrangement that his grandmother had established decades before interstellar travel was anything more than a physicist's fever dream. The figure was clearly feminine, tall and elegant in a way that made David immediately conscious of his own travel-rumpled appearance, and the fact that he hadn't seen a proper shower in 36 hours of hyperspace transit. "Okay, brain," he said aloud, a habit he developed during long stretches of solitary space travel. "Let's run through the possibilities here. 1. She's a very dedicated burglar with an unusual interest in heirloom tomatoes. 2. The quantum displacement finally scrambled my neurons, and I'm hallucinating the most mundane alien encounter in galactic history. 3. The cabin rental agency made a mistake and double-booked my emotional sanctuary with someone who actually knows how to keep plants alive." The woman straightened from where she'd been tending what appeared to be his grandmother's prize-winning bean plants, plants that should have been brown sticks after months of neglect. Instead, they climbed their poles with verdant enthusiasm, heavy with pods that caught the afternoon sunlight like green jewels. She turned toward his truck with unhurried confidence, and even from 50 yards away, David could see that something about her silhouette didn't quite conform to standard human parameters. Her ears, for one thing, swept upward in elegant points that caught the light like finely carved ivory. For another, she moved with the kind of fluid precision that usually indicated either extensive zero-gravity training or a fundamental difference in evolutionary development. David had worked with enough alien contractors to recognize the signs, though most of them didn't tend to show up uninvited in his backyard, wearing what appeared to be hand-woven fabric and a gardening apron. "Well," he said, still gripping the steering wheel like it might anchor him to some version of reality that made sense, "this is either going to be the most interesting homecoming I've ever had, or the start of a very expensive therapy bill." The woman raised one hand in what was unmistakably a greeting, her gesture carrying none of the wariness he might have expected from someone caught trespassing. Instead, she seemed almost expectant, as if his arrival was not just anticipated, but long overdue. David's communication implant, still synced to the truck's systems from his journey, chimed softly with an incoming message. The source identifier made him blink twice. It was his own property's environmental monitoring system, the same network that had been dutifully reporting normal conditions for months. "Welcome home, David Thornley," the message read in the crisp, professional tone of automated systems everywhere. "Guest access has been authorized for extended duration. All biological systems within acceptable parameters. Please note, garden productivity has exceeded baseline projections by 347% during your absence." He stared at the display, then looked back at the woman who was now regarding him with what might have been amusement. The pieces of this particular puzzle weren't just refusing to fit together. They seemed to be from entirely different boxes, possibly purchased in entirely different dimensions. 347%, he repeated slowly. "Right, because that's totally normal for an abandoned garden on a mountain that's barely within the habitable zone, and definitely not connected to any irrigation systems more sophisticated than 'hope it rains enough.'" The woman tilted her head, and David caught the flash of a smile that somehow managed to be both reassuring and mysterious. She returned to her work among the plants, moving with the easy confidence of someone who belonged exactly where she was, which was considerably more than David could say for himself at the moment. His fingers drummed against the steering wheel as he weighed his options. He could always back down the mountain and spend the night in town, while he figured out what kind of cosmic joke the universe had decided to play on him. He could call the local authorities, though explaining that his garden had been improved by what appeared to be a helpful alien would probably earn him a reputation that would follow him to every colony world in the sector. Or he could do what his grandfather would have done, walk up to his own front door, pour himself a drink, and ask his unexpected guest if she'd like to join him in figuring out exactly what was going on. The woman looked up again as he finally shut off the engine, her expression patient and knowing, as if she'd been waiting for him to reach exactly this conclusion. David grabbed his travel bag from the passenger seat, squared his shoulders, and prepared to have what would undoubtedly be the strangest conversation of a career that had already included negotiations with silicon-based hive minds, and a memorable incident involving sentient crystal formations that had strong opinions about mineral rights. "Well, Grandpa," he said to the mountain air, "I hope you're watching this, because I have a feeling your advice about treating unexpected guests with courtesy is about to get its most interesting test yet." David's grandfather had always insisted that the proper way to approach any difficult situation was with a firm handshake, direct eye contact, and a thermos of coffee strong enough to strip paint from a starship hull. Unfortunately, the thermos contained nothing but lukewarm disappointment. His hands were shaking slightly from residual hyperspace jitters, and maintaining direct eye contact with someone whose ears defied several fundamental assumptions about human anatomy was proving more challenging than expected. "So," he began, stopping a respectful distance from where the woman knelt among his grandmother's prized marigolds, "I hate to be that guy, but I'm pretty sure this is my garden you're dramatically improving, and I'm curious about the specifics of how that came to be." She looked up with eyes the color of deep forest shadows, and when she smiled, David felt something in his chest perform a small gravitational anomaly that had nothing to do with hyperspace travel. "You must be David Thornley," she said, her voice carrying an accent that sounded like wind through leaves if wind through leaves could somehow speak perfect English. "I am Lyria of the Verdani. I hope you don't mind the liberties I've taken with your agricultural arrangements." "Liberties," David repeated, gesturing at bean plants that were practically glowing with health and tomatoes that looked like they'd been personally blessed by whatever deity was responsible for perfect growing conditions. "That's one way to put it. Another way might be miraculous intervention that defies everything I know about botany and the basic principles of plant neglect." Lyria's laugh was like the sound of water over stones, musical and entirely too pleasant for someone he'd found trespassing in his backyard. Your grandmother chose her varieties well. They simply needed someone who understood their particular requirements. Right, their requirements. David shifted his weight, acutely aware that he was having what appeared to be a perfectly normal conversation about gardening with someone whose ears suggested evolutionary paths that definitely hadn't originated on Earth. And you would know about those requirements because I've been tending them for the past 3 months, she said, as if that explained anything at all. Your compost system is quite ingenious, by the way. The microbial balance is nearly perfect. David blinked. You've been living here in my cabin for 3 months. Oh no. Lyria's expression suggested he'd made an amusing assumption. I don't require the same shelter arrangements as humans. I've been staying in what you might call alternative accommodations. Alternative accommodations, he echoed, wondering if his translation implant was malfunctioning or if alien euphemisms were just naturally confusing. You mean like a tent, a cave, a dimensional pocket created by technology so advanced it makes our best quantum engineers weep into their coffee? Something like that. Her smile widened, revealing teeth that were perfectly human, except for being perhaps a touch too white, too even, like someone had designed them with optimization algorithms. Your sense of humor is exactly as I expected. That stopped him cold. As you expected, we've never met. I'm reasonably certain I'd remember meeting someone with. He waved vaguely at her ears, with your particular aesthetic modifications. We have met, in a manner of speaking, though you were somewhat preoccupied at the time. Lyria returned to her work among the marigolds, her movements precise and economical. These flowers are particularly responsive to bioelectric fields. Your grandmother must have had quite strong life force resonance to achieve such vibrant blooms. David's brain, already strained by 6 months of dealing with alien technology and the casual impossibilities of interstellar travel, began making the kind of grinding noises usually associated with overloaded processing cores. Bioelectric fields, life force resonance. Right. And here I thought she just had a good relationship with fertilizer and proper watering schedules. Those certainly helped, Lyria agreed with perfect seriousness. But plants respond to intention as much as nutrients. Your grandmother understood that. So do you, though perhaps not consciously. I understand that my garden was supposed to be dead after 6 months of abandonment, and instead it looks like the cover of Better Homes and Galactic Gardens. I understand that you're here doing whatever it is you're doing, for reasons you haven't actually explained yet. What I don't understand is why you're talking like you know me, and why my security system seems to think you have legitimate access to my property. Lyria paused, her hands stilling among the flowers. For the first time since he'd approached, she seemed to be choosing her words carefully. Some debts take time to properly repay, David Thornley. Some acts of kindness create obligations that transcend species and star systems. Debts? David's voice rose slightly. What debts? I've never been to your world, I don't remember meeting any Verdani, and I'm pretty sure I'd recall performing acts of kindness significant enough to warrant someone traveling across interstellar space to tend my vegetables. Memory is a curious thing, she said, standing with fluid grace that made David suddenly conscious of how much time he'd spent in cramped spacecraft, and how little attention he'd paid to basic physical conditioning. Sometimes the most important moments feel so natural, so right, that we don't recognize their significance until much later. David set down his travel bag and rubbed his temples, where a headache was building that had nothing to do with hyperspace displacement, and everything to do with conversations that seemed designed to answer every question, except the ones he was actually asking. Look, Lyria of the Verdani, I appreciate whatever you've done for my garden, I really do. But I've been traveling for 36 hours. I haven't had a decent meal since leaving the Proxima station, and I'm operating on the kind of sleep deficit that makes quantum mechanics seem straightforward. Could you maybe just tell me, in simple declarative sentences, why you're here and what you want?" She studied him for a long moment, her expression shifting from amusement to something that might have been sympathy. "What I want," she said finally, "is to finish what I started. What I'm here for is to honor a promise my people made long before you knew we existed. As for why," she gestured at the thriving garden around them, "the evidence of that is everywhere you look." "The evidence is vegetables," David said weakly. "Very nice vegetables, granted, but still just vegetables." "Just vegetables," Lyria repeated, her tone suggesting he just claimed that stars were just lights. "David Thornley, when was the last time you ate something grown in soil that knew your name?" Before he could ask what that even meant, his stomach chose that moment to remind him that spacecraft rations, while nutritionally adequate, bore roughly the same relationship to actual food that quantum equations bore to poetry. "They were," Lyria said, delicately sectioning what appeared to be a perfectly ordinary cucumber that somehow managed to taste like cucumber squared, as if someone had isolated the mathematical concept of cucumber and concentrated it into physical form. "The soil here holds memory, David. It remembers every hand that has worked it, every intention that has been planted along with the seeds." David paused mid-chew. "You're telling me my dirt has a better memory than I do?" "Your dirt, as you so poetically call it, has been absorbing quantum resonance patterns for decades. Your grandmother's hands, your grandfather's care, your own brief but enthusiastic gardening attempts during your university years." She smiled at his startled expression. "Yes, the earth remembers those too. That summer you tried to grow corn and ended up with a single stalk that produced exactly 3 kernels. How could you possibly know about that? That was 15 years ago, and I never told anyone about the great corn disaster of my agricultural education." David set down his fork, appetite momentarily forgotten, in favor of the growing certainty that this conversation was heading somewhere he wasn't sure he wanted to follow. "The soil told me," Lyria said simply. "As did the root networks, the mycorrhizal connections, the entire ecosystem that your family has been nurturing for generations. Plants communicate, David. They share information through chemical signals, electrical impulses, quantum entanglement at the molecular level. Your grandmother understood this instinctively. My grandmother understood that if you water plants and give them fertilizer, they grow." She was a practical woman, not a botanical quantum physicist. But even as he said it, David found himself remembering the way his grandmother had always seemed to know exactly which plants needed attention, how she could walk through her garden and somehow sense what each one required. "Practical wisdom and quantum understanding aren't mutually exclusive," Lyria observed, taking what appeared to be a perfectly normal bite of salad that somehow made her eyes bright, as if she just experienced a small revelation. "Sometimes the most profound truths are so simple that we mistake them for common sense." David reached for his water glass and discovered that even the water tasted different, cleaner somehow, as if it had been filtered through the memories of mountain springs and ancient aquifers. "Okay, I'll bite. Metaphorically speaking, since I'm already literally biting into the most impossibly delicious vegetables in known space. How does any of this explain why you're here, tending my garden, and apparently having philosophical discussions with my topsoil?" Lyria set down her utensils, her expression shifting to something more serious. 7 years ago, my exploration vessel experienced what you might call a critical system failure while conducting a routine survey of your planet's upper atmosphere. Our ships aren't like your mechanical constructs, David. They're living entities, bio-neural networks that have evolved alongside our species for millennia. When they're injured, they don't just break down. They die. "Living ships," David repeated slowly. "Right, and let me guess, your particular living ship decided to have its crisis right above my mountain." "Not decided, was guided." Lyria's fingers traced abstract patterns on the wooden table, and David noticed that wherever she touched, the grain seemed to respond, becoming more pronounced, more alive. When a Verdani bioship is dying, it seeks out compatible organic matter, sources of life force that might help it heal. Your property resonated across dimensional barriers, David. The quantum signature of this place called to my ship like a beacon. David felt something cold settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the impossibly perfect vegetables. What happened to your ship? It crashed, she said quietly. In your back meadow, during a thunderstorm that your weather records will show occurred on the night of June 15th, 7 years ago. The bioneural matrix was failing, the living components of the ship's consciousness flickering toward extinction. I had perhaps an hour before both of us died. The cold in David's stomach crystallized into something approaching recognition. June 15th. That was the night the lightning knocked out the power grid for half the county. The night I spent dragging wheelbarrows full of compost and topsoil to cover up what I thought was erosion damage in the meadow. Erosion damage, Lyria repeated with a smile that managed to be both sad and grateful. You worked for hours in that storm, David, soaked to the skin, cursing the weather and the mud and the inconvenience of it all. But you couldn't stand to see what appeared to be scarred earth, so you covered it with the richest organic matter you could find. Compost that had been aging for years, soil that held decades of your family's care and attention. David's fork clinked against his plate as the memory solidified. He could recall that night with sudden, vivid clarity. The way the lightning had seemed to dance across the meadow in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The strange sensation that the very air was alive with electricity and possibility. I thought I was having a nervous breakdown from too much caffeine and graduate school stress. The way the ground seemed to pulse, like it was breathing. It was breathing, Lyria said softly. My ship's bioneural network was trying to integrate with your planet's ecosystem, to find some way to survive in an alien environment. What you saw as erosion damage was actually the ship's root systems attempting to establish symbiotic connections with the native soil chemistry. And the compost I dumped on it saved both our lives. Her voice carried a weight of emotion that made David's chest tighten. The organic compounds in your compost provided exactly the nutrients my ship needed to stabilize its bioneural matrix. The soil held the quantum resonance patterns that allowed the healing process to begin. By morning, the ship had recovered enough to establish proper camouflage protocols and begin the slow process of regeneration. David stared at his plate, where vegetables that had been grown in soil that had apparently once hosted a dying alien spacecraft continued to taste like concentrated sunshine and possibility. So you're telling me that I accidentally performed xenobiology emergency medicine with a wheelbarrow and some really old potato peels. The best kind of medicine, Lyria said, and her laugh held notes of relief that seemed to echo across years. Instinctive, generous, and completely unconcerned with whether the patient was technically supposed to exist. And now you're here because your people have some kind of cosmic debt collection policy. We're here, she corrected gently, because among the Verdani, life debts are not obligations to be discharged, but relationships to be honored. You didn't just save my ship, David. You saved a being that has served my family for 7 generations, a consciousness that holds the memories and wisdom of countless journeys across the stars. David reached for his water glass again, buying time to process the idea that his late-night storm cleanup had apparently resulted in his becoming entangled in an interstellar relationship he'd never known existed. So the garden maintenance is what? A thank you note. The garden maintenance, Lyria said, is just the beginning. The revelation that his property had become an interdimensional lighthouse for alien navigation systems explained several things David had been trying not to think about, including why his grandfather's old compass had started pointing toward the garden shed instead of magnetic north, and why the local wildlife had developed an unusual interest in congregating near his back meadow. "So let me see if I understand this correctly," David said, watching Lyria coax impossible blooms from a patch of wildflowers that shouldn't have been flowering in late autumn. "My late-night compost therapy session didn't just save your ship. It created some kind of quantum entanglement between your bio-neural navigation network and my mountain ecosystem, turning my backyard into a cosmic GPS beacon for the entire Verdani fleet." "Not the entire fleet," Lyria corrected with the kind of precision that suggested she'd had to explain interstellar navigation to confused humans before. "Just the exploration vessels operating in this sector of the galaxy. Though I admit the beacon effect has been more robust than we initially calculated." "More robust?" David gestured at a section of his garden where the plants seemed to be growing in mathematically perfect spirals that hurt his eyes if he looked at them too long. "Is that why my tomatoes are developing non-Euclidean geometry? That's a temporary side effect of the quantum resonance calibration. They'll return to normal spatial dimensions once the network stabilizes." She paused thoughtfully. "Though they may retain enhanced nutritional properties and the ability to grow in 12 different dimensional orientations simultaneously." "Of course they will." David found himself laughing, a sound that felt rusty from disuse. "You know, 6 months ago, the most exotic thing in my life was trying to explain atmospheric processing to a committee of bureaucrats who thought terraforming was something you did to bathroom tiles. Now I'm apparently running an interstellar bed-and-breakfast for alien navigation systems, complete with quantum vegetables and a groundskeeper who can make dirt sing lullabies." "The soil doesn't sing lullabies," Lyria said seriously. "It hums harmonic frequencies that promote cellular regeneration. Completely different." "Right, my mistake. Harmonic frequencies, much more scientifically respectable than lullabies." David watched her hands move among the plants, noting how each touch seemed to spark tiny auroras in the air around her fingers. "Can I ask you something that's been bothering me since dinner?" "Of course. Why are you still here? I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm grateful for the garden maintenance and the vegetables that taste like they were grown in paradise. But you said the debt was repaid. Your ship recovered. Your people can navigate using my property as a beacon, and presumably your cosmic honor code has been satisfied. So why stay?" Lyria's hand stilled among the flowers, and for a moment David thought he'd overstepped some alien protocol he didn't understand. Then she smiled, and it was like watching sunrise over a planet that had never known night. "Do you remember what you said to yourself the night you saved us?" she asked, "when you were dragging that last wheelbarrow of compost through the storm?" David frowned, reaching back through years and hyperspace lag to that electric night. "I probably said a lot of things, most of them involving creative applications of interstellar profanity. You said nobody should have to heal alone in the dark." Her voice carried the weight of exact quotation. "The ship's bio-neural matrix recorded everything that night, David. Every word, every intention, every moment when you chose to keep working despite the storm and the hour, and the fact that you thought you were just fixing erosion." The memory surfaced with startling clarity, the way the damaged Earth had seemed to pulse with pain in the lightning flashes, his inexplicable certainty that leaving it exposed and wounded would be somehow wrong. "You heard all that." "We felt all that. Your compassion, your instinctive understanding that healing requires presence, not just resources. Among my people, that kind of empathy is considered the highest form of intelligence." She turned to face him fully, her ears catching the last light of the setting sun. "The debt was repaid months ago, David. I stayed because I wanted to understand the kind of person who would spend hours in a storm to tend to what appeared to be empty ground." "And what did you conclude from your anthropological study?" David asked, though his throat felt suddenly tight. "That empty ground doesn't exist, not here, not with you. Everything you touch becomes part of something larger, more connected. Your grandmother's garden, your grandfather's land, the ecosystem you've been nurturing without even realizing it. She gestured at the thriving abundance around them. You don't just grow plants, David. You grow possibilities. David looked around at his transformed property, seeing it through new eyes. The garden that had become a beacon for travelers crossing impossible distances. The soil that held memories and dreams in equal measure. The quiet mountain sanctuary that had somehow become a bridge between worlds. So what happens now? He asked. Do you go back to your exploration vessel and report that humans are marginally less primitive than previously believed? Do I get a certificate of appreciation from the Galactic Garden Club? Now, Lyria said, settling cross-legged among the flowers with casual grace, we plant next year's garden. Your quantum beings are going to need companions that can handle multidimensional growth patterns, and I have some seeds from my homeworld that I think would thrive in soil that remembers kindness. You want to stay here permanently. I want to learn what you can teach me about growing things that matter in places where they're needed most. Her smile was gentle but determined. My people are explorers, David. We map star systems and catalog worlds and document the endless variety of life in the universe. But exploration isn't just about discovering what's out there. Sometimes it's about recognizing what's been here all along, waiting for the right person to help it grow. David felt something shift in his chest, a settling that had nothing to do with hyperspace displacement, and everything to do with finding himself in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. You know, I was thinking of expanding the garden anyway. Maybe adding some raised beds near the south fence, possibly a greenhouse for winter growing. If you're going to be staying, we should probably discuss your preferences for interdimensional horticulture. I think, Lyria said, as the first stars began appearing in the darkening sky above them, this is going to be a very interesting collaboration. Later, as they worked side by side planning next season's arrangements, David realized that his 6 months among the stars had taught him something his grandfather had always known. The most important journeys don't take you farther from home. They help you understand what home really means and who you're meant to share it with. The quantum vegetables hummed softly in the evening breeze, their harmonic frequencies carrying news of growth and connection across distances that light itself had never imagined. And in his mountain garden, 2 gardeners from different worlds discovered that some things truly are universal. The satisfaction of soil under fingernails, the promise held in every planted seed, and the quiet joy of nurturing something beautiful together. David's compass still pointed toward the garden shed, but he no longer minded. Sometimes the most reliable navigation system wasn't the one that showed you magnetic north, but the one that showed you where you belong.